This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. Now, this is the show where we talk about the days and weeks events. We talk about happenings in the world, in politics, in health, in entertainment, all of the things that we interact with and hear about throughout our week. And we take a look at them from a higher perspective. We take a step back. We look at what these stories, which is what they are, stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and that we are recreating and creating for our own sense of connection and for our own growth. We look at these things and we see what they have to offer us. We go in pretty deep sometimes to see what nuggets they have to help us in our efforts to expand our consciousness and our awareness of our oneness, of our unity. Because that's what all the fighting is about. If you didn't know, if you hadn't gotten it, that's what all the fighting is about, in one way or another. All the fighting. Fighting over Gaza, fighting in Syria, fighting in the Ukraine. It's all about unity. It's all about recognizing and becoming more fully aware of our oneness, of who and what we really are. And these fights are opportunities to explore that even more deeply. And our ability to create on a level which we are not consciously aware of in our everyday awareness, creates these opportunities, creates these little holographic storylines in which we interact, participate, or watch with great interest. And this leads us to further understanding and further exploration of who and what we really are. That's my take on it. It's easy to lose sight of that kind of awareness in the heat of battle, if you will, in the heat of the emotions that get triggered by these events or just hearing about these events. But it's important to understand why these things are occurring and what we can do about them. And to my mind, the biggest thing we can do about them is honor, recognize, and make an affirmation for peace. Declare peace. And we do that through meditation. We send a vision of peace, if you will, or even not so much a vision, but just an extension of peace. We go within, we meditate, and we send peace outwards. And we don't just wish for peace. And we don't just pray for peace in the traditional Orthodox way of prayer. We manifest peace. We release peace. We affirm peace in the world. There's a prayer that is often used in churches like Unity Church and others. that says wherever you are, God is and all is well. And if you are a religious person, you believe in God, the recognition that God is within and that you are part of that, and with Him you co-create, is a really important understanding for, I believe, any religious faith to understand at this juncture in our development, evolution, whatever you want to call it. And that's what this show is about. That's what the show talks about in one way or another. As I say all the time, it's not a religious show. We will talk about religion, and not in disparaging terms. I don't disparage anybody on this show or their beliefs, even atheists. But that's not the focus of our show, any traditional, particular religious belief system. It's somewhere between science and religion, if you will. But in any case, enough of the preliminaries. Let's get on to the main event, if you will. So today, as I mentioned, I mentioned some of the conflicts that are going on, and we'll go back and we'll talk about some of those because they are, top of the news these days. But we are also going to talk about yoga. We often talk about yoga here, and some of the appropriate times in which you might choose to use yoga. And we're also going to talk about, and this is going to be something that I'm going to focus more and more on a weekly basis, is the scientific research that has and continues to go on that shows us pretty much unequivocally and without doubt that there are such things as psychic ability, psychic healing, what they call astral projection, or in a sense being remote viewing, or being able to see something very far away without actually being there. Telepathy, ESP. For years, scientists have been studying this, and for years we have been finding increasingly correlating evidence that this not only exists, but that it is part of our DNA, if you will. However, and it seems to be that no matter how many of these remarkable studies get published, every time they do, they're either largely ignored by the mainstream scientific community, often attacked in one way or another by those that want to question their science. But even those that are unable to be questioned because the science is so good, they are, the scientific community continues to be alternately amazed when these things come out, and then kind of just ignores them. And I think there's a real cognitive dissonance in these things. My belief in it, and we'll get to that later, is that there's a reason why. It's almost like a shield or a block that prevents one from seeing things. If you've ever, read or seen a science fiction story in which an alien or super being materializes, but they are just too terrifying for the average person to see, so they have to change their form. That's kind of what I think is going on here, but we'll talk about that. And we're also going to talk about the idea of, comic books and science fiction, which are proliferating incredibly in film and television. We're going to talk about how they are the mythology of our time and what we resonate to in these stories, or possibly resonate to in these stories. As you might guess, I have spent the past weekend or so at Comic-Con conventions and Star Trek conventions, so I'm primed for this discussion here. But I think that it is something that has tremendous social import. You may have noticed Comic-Con has become this huge phenomenon that grows every year, and has spread throughout the country. In comic book conventions are proliferating all over the place, as are science fiction conventions. People are finding truths in these stories, in these characters, and they're loving it. And they're going to them in a sense of, it's like worship in a way. So we'll talk about all of that, and we'll also get to some scientific breakthroughs that are showing us that our imaginations may not even be fast enough to keep up with technology. But back to what's going on in this world of conflict right now, or appearance of conflict, if you will. Now, I've mentioned for the past couple of years, I'll continue mentioning it all the way through 2015 as I do this show, and hopefully I will be able to continue to do this show. Is that this period of 2012 through 2015, astrologers have told me that the particular arrangement of planets, particularly Uranus and Pluto, that are at right angles to each other. This is something, and these are, according to astrologers, slow-moving planets, so their effects last for quite some time. So this period through 2012 through 2015 is characterized by this conflict between Uranus and Pluto. And it's a time of protests and revolutions in social areas, where you're seeing tremendous progress in things like gay rights and all of that kind of stuff, as well as in governments and new forms of leadership. And we've seen this. If you think about all of the things that you've been hearing about over the past few years, Egypt, Syria, the Middle East, now the Ukraine, it's amazing. It's truly amazing what is going on there. Now we've got goings on, in South American countries that are having to make some huge changes. They're sending children across the border, facing untold dangers, just to get them out of these countries, like El Salvador and so forth, that are being overrun by what appear to be drug lords. And the governments are desperately trying to reinvent themselves and take back control. These are the sorts of things that are going to happen over this period of 2012 through 2015. The symbolism involved in the planets, by the way, and you may have skepticism about astrology. That's fine. I've seen it work. I see it at work in just about everything that my daily life, in the broader world. Many others, including a member of parliament in Great Britain who has declared his belief in astrology to criticism and even jeers of some of his colleagues. Many people understand that this ancient technology, which is really what it is, it's an ancient technology of reading the stars and their influence, is something that has at least a certain amount of symbolism to it. You can look at it that way. To my mind, if the moon and its magnetic poles influence the tides of the oceans and our moods, as scientific research has shown that it does, then it stands to reason that other planets have similar or other kinds of influences upon our world. Anyway, I'm not going to get into a debate here about the pros and cons of astrology. Just to give you the symbolism, Uranus is the planet of creativity, innovation, and revolution, of upheaval, of change. It's not always pretty, and it's sometimes a little crazy, a little chaotic. Uranus rules the astrological sign of Aquarius, and Aquarians are known to be rather quixotic. They can be a little bit eccentric. They're also known to be innovative, creative, revolutionary, and just a little bit offbeat. They don't conform to the regular, the social norms, if you will. Not all of them, but you know what I mean. They tend to be unique and outstanding individuals. Pluto is the planet of, many things. Among them is death and rebirth. It's the planet of obsessiveness and control and, deep power. It can also be, it's often viewed, as negative power, as destructive power, but it can also be viewed as transformative power. So, keep in mind, for instance, the planet Pluto was discovered around the same time as the atom bomb was being worked on, and a little element that is important in the atom bomb, plutonium, was discovered as well. So plutonium kind of explains it as this amazing power that can destroy or transform. So, when those two are right angles with each other, Pluto tends to be... Also, Pluto, you can think of plutocracy, which is rule by an elite few, often very wealthy, certainly very powerful. So Pluto is about power and holding on to that power. So you can think of this conflict, this right angle of the revolutionary with the power obsessed, to characterize what's going to be going on right all the way through 2015. But because these planets are so powerful and their effects are so long lasting, what this is going to do is be a transformative period as well. It's going to sow the seeds, and when everything settles down, you're going to have a new framework from which to create a greater outward stability in the world. So that's what's going on. And as I mentioned, the truth of what's going on is all of these fights are fights about recognizing unity. The most recent flare-up is what's going on in Iraq, where we have now sent more bombs because of the humanitarian crisis there and the emergence of another terrorist organization that we see as a threat to our security. And what's being called for is a unity government for Iraq, where all people are, all factions, all of the belief systems. And as you may know, there's 3 different ones in Iraq. You know, you have the Sunnis and the Kurds and the Shiites. And the synthesizing of all of them, they are recognizing their oneness together, is what has been so elusive and is what is needed to help them. And that's what it's all been about. That's what it still is all about. And that's what the transformative element in this is. As I said, you know, these things are what we can use to get closer to that truth. All right, now, so I want to talk about, again, as I went to, or as I watched the various panels and other coverage of Comic-Con, and as I went to my usual Star Trek convention last weekend, you know, I noticed that, you know, the ever-increasing interest in science fiction and comic book characters, these heroes, are aspects of ourselves. They are our new mythology in many, many ways. And they also are showing us a great truth of ourselves. You know, all of these heroes, if you think of them, you think about Spider-Man, or you think about the Incredible Hulk, or even Batman, or even Iron Man. Well, Thor is already a god, so him not so much. But a big part of the story, particularly with characters like Spider-Man and Iron Man and so forth, and Captain America, are these ordinary people who unleash or unlock their extraordinary ability. They discover their own power, and through that become heroes, become larger than life. But they do it in a way that's very traditionally, mystical. They go through a transformation, not unlike the kind of tribal trials that, for instance, Native American or African shamans would go through when they were discovering their shamanic ability. Spider-Man gets bitten by a radioactive spider, and his ability begins to evolve and show itself, and he doesn't know what it is at first, and at first it's frightening and scary, and then he begins to understand what it is. Tony Stark, as Iron Man, goes through a near-death experience in the desert, and that is what leads to his discovery of this powerful engine that he's able to put into his chest, into his heart, to keep him alive, and also what leads to the creation of Iron Man. Bruce Banner, in his scientific research, unleashes gamma rays, which in turn unleash an uncontrollable power. This is like nuclear energy. The Hulk is awesome in its power and strength. The Hulk is also, I guess for lack of a better term, amoral. He doesn't particularly have any skin in the game one way or the other, so he can be a hero at times if you can harness and use him in the right way. And there's other times when he's just going to smash you. And Bruce Banner's constant attempts to try to control this beast in him are what make up that mythology. So it's fascinating, and there's a book out written by a religious studies scholar from Rice University. His name is Jeffrey Kripal, and he's written a book called Mutants and Mystics, which takes a look at how these stories parallel stories of psychic abilities, stories of mystic mythologies as well. And it's an interesting idea that, what's happening is we turn to these precisely because of what I mentioned earlier. We have this scientific research that is showing us that we have abilities like being able to heal at a distance, ESP, telepathy, all of these things. And yet there's no place for us to really seriously explore them in the mainstream, because they seem to be met with deaf ears. And so these stories allow us to put it in a place where it can be explored in a way that is non-threatening to the status quo of the belief system. There's a story that is often told about, some people have called it, referred to it as Columbus's ships. Others have assigned it to Magellan's ships. But the story goes that these European ships sailed into a bay where a thriving Native American community was going about its fishing business and other things. And that no one saw these ships. None of the Native Americans saw these ships. It was like they were invisible. And the reason they were invisible was because they were so beyond anything that these Native Americans had seen or could understand, that it literally didn't enter their consciousness. They literally couldn't see it. And I think that's what happens with scientific research in these areas. These belief systems that science has created, which have already been basically thrown out the window with what we now understand and has been confirmed with quantum physics, as well as the discovery of the so-called God particle, the Higgs boson. The entire rigor of scientific method is now, if not suspect, it's completely thrown out the window. Because, among other things, what it's shown is that the observer affects what's being observed, so that there's no such thing as observation. But I don't want to get too far into that. In any case, I believe that being stuck in that particular worldview, anything that threatens that worldview or doesn't fit into that worldview isn't seen, becomes invisible. I'm these days, though I am it does bother me that this research is dismissed out of hand by some who just call it, immediately assume it's bogus. But what's even more disturbing to my mind is the lack of of awareness that these things have happened. The complete ignoring of these amazing research projects, and I'm going to go through in future shows. We're going to talk more and more about what some of these are and what some of the findings have been. I've already touched on some of it in previous shows, and I'll continue to do that because I feel it's important that someone continue to talk about this. And there are those, like Professor Krappel, by the way, who are talking about it and who are saying that there's a reality to our extraordinary abilities that humans have that is reflected and magnified in our mythology, in our religious stories, and now in our popular media through comic books and through science fiction programming, movies, television, and so forth. That's his point. I totally agree. And just as an example of that, there's a story out today. In Japan, apparently, the ancient Japanese art of origami, which, if you aren't familiar with, origami is an art form in which paper is folded to create sculptures and characters. Well, in Japan, they have developed what they call origami robots that fold into motion. And these robots fold and unfold, and so they are behaving like, you guessed it, Transformers. So we now have actual real-life Transformers being created. So, as I say, our imagination is sometimes not as fast as technology. So, we'll talk more about that next week, perhaps, if we have some time, but we're running low on time here. So, once again, time to say goodbye. Keep sending those peaceful